On the podcast today, we're going to dissect the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching, and this will make up part of a series which we'll call the 81 Meditations of the Tao Te Ching. And we're not going to do that every week, people. We're going to do that periodically. Maybe we'll do one chapter a month. And that will obviously 81, so that's going to take us over a year.
81 months.
81 months. Yes, 81 months of the Tao Te Ching.
Yeah.
But yes, we're going to do. This has been a popular request actually by a lot of people asking us if we can dissect each chapter, and who are we to disappoint? And so we're going to speak about the first chapter today of the Tao Te Ching. We're going to dissect it, what it means, and the depth, the spiritual depth of this chapter. And the text we are using, the translation we are using, is the Jia Fu Feng and Jane English translation. This is the one I highly recommend. I know a lot of people like Stephen Mitchell's translation / modern interpretation, and I do personally as well. I enjoy it as well. But if you want one that's closer to the actual translation, then the Jia Fu Feng and Jane English one is closer to the translation, and it also accentuates the text, the beauty of the text in English. So we will be using this one. Now that doesn't mean that there's not other good translations out there. Hans Georg Mawela has a good translation. Philip Ivanhoe. There's many. So let's have a look at it. Before we get into it, what's interesting in this one is Jacob Needleman does an amazing introduction in this one. You and I know beautifully. And for those of you who don't know Jacob Needleman, then shame on you, because he's one of the greatest scholars still living, greatest philosophers, I should say, too. And when you actually read Jacob Needleman's introduction, it's almost like you don't need anything else in Taoist literature but his introduction. You know what I mean? It's so amazing. So before we actually read the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching, I want to to reorient what the Tao Te Ching actually is, and Jacob Needleman actually describes it really well, and I'll also use his explanation of the Tao. So Needleman says, the Tao Te Ching is a work of metaphysical psychology, taking us far beyond the social and biological factors that have been the main concern of modern psychology. It helps us see how the fundamental forces of the cosmos itself are mirrored in our own individual inner structure, and it invites us to try to live in direct relationship with all these forces. Beautifully said, right? So that's kind of what we are talking about. So this natural law, this Tao, these fundamental forces that come from the source, the Tao, or if we want to use Vedanta, Brahman. And so there's this inner structure within us, but it's not also a lot of people confuse Taoism just with Tai Chi Chuan. And that's kind of interesting because Tai Chi is not like an essential aspect of Taoism. It may accentuate your understanding of Taoism, but Tai Chi Chuan and other internal arts are also found in other traditions, like the Shaolin tradition, which is a Chan tradition, a Zen tradition. And so to be a Taoist, you don't essentially have to practice Tai Chi, or Qigong or any of these internal arts. That would be like saying every Hindu ought to practice Hatha Yoga. And you and I know that that's not true. There's many different paths. Taoism itself is, as Needleman said, it's a work of metaphysical psychology. And so to understand that Tao and to give people an understanding of why it's not just related to practices like Tai Chi and this and that, Needleman says that metaphysically, the term Tao refers to the way things are. Psychologically, it refers to the way human nature is constituted, the deep dynamic structure of our being. Ethically, it means the way human beings must conduct themselves with others. Spiritually, it refers to the guidance that is offered to us, the methods of searching for the truth that have been handed down by the great sages of the past, the way of inner work. Yet all these meanings of Tao are ultimately one. So, in those two, phrases, quotes I just gave you from Needleman, you get a pretty good understanding of what the Tao Te Ching and what the Tao is. And so, you know, we're trying to get back to that spiritual understanding in Taoism. And when he says they're handed down by the great sages of the past, then obviously Lao Tzu being one of those sages, and also Zhuangzi being another of the great Taoist sages that we have. So that kind of sets the platform, right? And that understanding that the Tao is in everything, right? It's that inner structure of the universe, that natural law that's coming from the source. So
it's inevitable to understand the like Jacob Needleman's philosophical interpretation of the Tao Te Ching, because I mean a lot of us reading Tao Te Ching without a deeper understanding of it, you just without interpretation, actually you can get a lot out of it, right? But with the interpretation, you get much deeper essence of what the scriptures mean, really, right? And like you just read, like a psychological aspect, metaphysical, psychological aspect, which actually a lot of us kind of bypass that sort of aspect of understanding, I think. Definitely.
And we'll get more into that as we go through this. So, without further ado, let's read the first chapter. So, obviously, the first line of this chapter is one of the more famous ones in world literature, as we know. So let's have a look. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of 10,000 things. Ever desireless, one can see the mystery. Ever desiring, one can see the manifestations. These two spring from the same source, but differ in name. This appears as darkness, darkness within darkness, the gate to all mystery. So, as I said, especially the first line, right? The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao is kind of one of the more famous lines in all of world literature.
Yeah.
So, and again, like this, you know, like when this text was first translated into English, I mean, like,
it doesn't really mean anything, honestly, if you just read words.
Yeah. And if you don't have what do you say? If you don't have an understanding of that way that they're talking about, like Tao could be translated as way or path, but that sense of that path in your life, or that intrinsic structure of the Tao's kind of, in some sense, guiding your life, but also within your own structure, you feeling that presence of that structure within your own being. And so, again, when this text became known to a lot of Westerners back in the 1800s and then in the 1900s, then modern Western, that sort of Western society, and even, I should say, even modern society in general now, don't have an understanding of this path, this innate structure of the universe that's actually in all of our lives. But what's the blockage is the intellect and the ego. The ego acts sort of as a blockage to these fundamental forces that animate our life. And so that's one of the main blockages within this. And so when we're talking about the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao, so the very act of naming, right? Like the name that can be named is not the eternal name. Like the very act of superimposition on reality.
Yes, when we name something, the intellect naturally implied to it, right? And that intellect, to say that's like more like surface, like psychologically speaking, we could also say a bit of an ego part of it as well. So that part of our mind is determining what Tao is. It cannot be eternal Tao, right?
No, of course.
And here, I think Tao also could be like the truth.
The truth, yeah.
Yeah, the truth of nature, like law of
the
nature.
truth of the universe.
Yes, that's right.
The fundamental truth.
And like you just mentioned, the Tao, the path. I think to understand the Tao in this context, we need to understand we need to have an experience, the feeling of what that path is. What you mentioned. That's so important, because if you don't understand it, you just may take it as a kind of literal meaning. Because literally, if you take it literally, I don't think it makes much sense.
No.
In this context.
No, of course not. And then when, like what you said, from the intellectual, egotistical perspective, from the level of the ego, right? The ego is a construct of the manifest, of the manifest world. That, like I said, impedes it's the blockage of the fundamental forces of the universe, the fundamental understanding of the Tao, the truth, like you said, like that fundamental truth. And so for example, if you're operating from the level of the ego, then you're wound up in this game of superimposition, of naming, of categorizing, so forth and so on. And in this context, like other religions will language God as like some sort of being and this and that, but then it's more of an intellectual understanding, and it escapes that sort of mystery, right? It's like in the Upanishads where they say, when you know the Brahman, you do not know the Brahman. When you do not know the Brahman, you know the Brahman. So because that again is alluding to the naming of that ultimate reality, which in a sense escapes intellectual and logical conclusion.
Yes.
Because it's beyond kind of rigorous analysis. It's a felt experience. Yeah. And so it's like in Vedanta, right? In Vedanta, one of the famous metaphors is the snake and the rope. Yeah. So there's a rope, but we believe it's a snake, right? And so because we think the rope is a snake, our whole life is molded in that way. But it's a rope. Yeah. It's not going to harm you and not going to do anything to you. But that's the problem. See, when we are giving things a name, then our life is out of alignment with the fundamental forces of the universe, with the Tao. It's out of alignment with it.
It just disrupts our vision to see what actually is. Right?
Exactly.
So what it is, just to see how things really are, right?
Yes.
That's what Jacob Needleman said.
Yeah.
To be able to see how things really are is to see from that nameless place, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Going beyond the apparent world,
yes.
the apparent self, which is the ego, and that's the like a place where you want to see the reality, to be able to see how things really are.
Yes. Well, the reality is impartial, right? Like what we find in the Zhuangzi text a lot is Zhuangzi talking about this impartial reality, because partiality is again a construct of an ego.
Yeah.
The ego has constructed a reality of this and that, which actually blocks us from, like you said, seeing the way things actually are, coming into alignment with the way of nature. In nature, there's no dissection between good or bad. There's no moralistic rules and so forth and so on. This is all an egotistical construct. And so Taoism itself, again, as we've discussed in previous podcasts and other podcasts, is amoral because it's a natural path. And a lot of people who are Western get their back up about that because they think it is, they don't understand that it's not like saying that people don't act and behave in a bad way. It's saying that when you have moral rules and so forth and so on, you are creating its opposition. You are creating, so for example, if you have rules that thou shalt not steal, then you're instantly creating a thief and so forth and so on. You have this, and it distorts people's nature, because our nature is not to live by moralistic rules. Because according to Taoism, our nature is fundamentally good, and the socialization is what warps our nature.
I think what you just said is exactly coincide with the next line. The named is the mother of 10,000 things, right?
Yeah.
So that from that place that you're seeing things from the very surface level, that creates the 10,000 things as in manifested world, which is purely materialistic.
Yeah.
And that also means that 10,000 things within our mind as well, right? Like our images, our memories, our all these the thoughts that we have in our mind, which separates our psychological state, right?
Yes.
And that manifested world, that place of looking at things, that creates that the psychological schism.
Yes. Because you've identified with the 10,000 things.
Right.
And you're not identified with the Tao.
Yeah.
You don't understand the source of the 10,000 things, you know. And so Taoism essentially is an act of return to the Tao. So it's kind of like you're hitting the rewind button on your very existence. Taoism's not saying that you can't do things in the 10,000 things in the manifest world. Obviously, if you put your energy into certain things and so forth and so on, you can achieve certain things. And from a Taoist perspective, that's neither good or bad. The orientation is different, that's all. Your orientation is towards the 10,000 things, which means you're out of alignment with the way things are. Because the way things are is to return to the way of nature, and that's where Wu-Wei and those sorts of attitudes and mentalities of non-doing and letting go and so forth and so on are to your benefit, because then you know, see how it's the opposite, right? You're letting go, you're not trying to cling on to life, you're letting go because you understand that there's this way of living that runs counter to any sort of social system and culture and religion, and that is what's going to bring you back into actually alignment with the actual real source of the universe, which can't be found in rigorous intellectual speculation, and you can't understand logically, and there's no conclusion to it, you know.
Again, the goal of practicing in Taoism is to go beyond the 10,000 things.
Yes.
Right? Go beneath the 10,000 things. Yes. Which is the Tao, the truth. And
That's right. And so if you're only working in that field of the 10,000 things, then that's where suffering and so forth and so on originates from, because you've bought into the illusion of this and that, right and wrong, good and bad.
It's where all the separation come from.
Yes.
And like we, divided what's good or bad, and what's ours, what's yours, and creating all these apparent enemies.
Yes.
Which doesn't really bond humanity at all.
No. A lot of people don't understand that Taoism is a path of non-duality. See, they don't think it's a path of non-duality because I've heard this before. People think it's an individualistic path, and it's like, no, it's a path of, you're dissolving that, because to return to the source, you can't operate from the ego's personality. You have to get beneath that, because that's a construct of socialization and so forth and so on. That's actually warped your nature because you believe in that. And when you let go of that and you let the Tao guide you, that's when you come into harmony with that. That's that holistic perspective, right? You come into harmony with the Tao, because the individual, say for any individual itself, is a manifestation of all of the, from a Taoist perspective, is a manifestation of all of the energy and forces of the whole. So the whole universe, you are an accumulation of all that energy, and you are that focal point to recognize and understand the Tao and the source of, which is the source of the universe. And so that's what we're doing here. And so in returning to that, you have to get beneath your ego identity. And so Taoism itself is a path of non-duality. In a different context, like it's kind of similar to Vishishtadvaita Vedanta in Vedanta, where Vishishtadvaita is a path of non-duality, but it's an understanding that the oneness is within kind of this manifest play of forms and separation and so forth and so on, which is different a little bit to, say, Advaita Vedanta, which just eliminate any sort of form of separation, even with, like, you know, in this, like, this is Maya, like this reality is an illusion, and even if you think that there's separation between you and I, it's all one, and that may be true, but from a psychological perspective, Taoism doesn't adhere to that. It adheres more to the Vishishtadvaita understanding, where it's all one, but it's all the Tao, but there are, you know, different beings walking around and doing things, and it's probably psychologically healthy to behave in that way, even though you may understand it, but you're kind of like a genuine pretender, the Zhuangzi genuine pretender, where you understand everything as one, but you play your role well, and you know, and so that's kind of that mentality in Taoism, and we have to remember, is non-dual. So.
Yeah, well, these are nameless and named, and desireless and desired. And these two, first chapter said these two are come from the same source, but different names.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you were saying. And also I think that was also, that's coincide with the yoga tradition.
Yes.
Like there's Purusha and Prakriti. But all part of one thing will come from that one pure consciousness.
Yes.
But there is a Purusha, which is pure consciousness. Prakriti is the mind. Yeah. So that also coincides with that as well.
Yeah, of course it does, yeah. Well, Purusha is kind of like the same. It's like that return, right? You're returning to the source. You're residing as, or abiding as, pure consciousness, and then the manifest world and the mind and everything is... it's doing its thing, you know. And that's the Taoist perspective, right? You ought not to interfere with existence because, first of all, who are you to know what is right for existence? Because the Tao knows what's right. The Tao is just animating itself, and it is manifesting itself in the way that it does. And though we may, from an egotistical level, we may get annoyed with certain things that happen in the world and the way that people behave and this and that, but if you are a budding Taoist, or if you are a Taoist, your role is not to get engaged with that. You are to leave that for people who have bought into that illusion of this and that. Your role is not to engage in that, and your role is to understand the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. That's what your role is. It's not to get into this whole game of naming and this and that. It's to get beneath your ego and to get to the level of the source. That's what's important. Yeah. And one of the lines we didn't speak about was the nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth, right? So heaven and earth here we need to understand as obviously earth, and then also the heavens, right? So space, the stars, the entire universe, all of its energy. And so the nameless is the source of all of that. So the Tao is the source of all of that. And those fundamental forces are the yin and yang forces of the universe. The feminine, the yin, and the masculine, the yang. And so that is what manifests all the entire universe. And so that nameless, the Tao, is, again, the origin that we have to come into contact with. We have to come back into contact with the origin of which is ever present. It's not like it's not here now. It's in the 10,000 things, but we believe that the 10,000 things is all that there is, and that leads into materialism and the culture that we have now, which is so far connected from the source. You see, because we've identified with the 10,000 things material world, and the product of that 10,000 things, which is the ego, is the byproduct of that. It's the accumulation of socialization, of culture, which becomes your personality. And then what can happen from there? You know, conflict, wars, you know.
Yeah, the society and individuals have come so far away from the origination of all things. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so also it talks about desires. Yeah, ever desireless one can see mystery. and ever desiring, one can see the manifestation. So desireless is to go beyond the desire, obviously, which is going beneath our mind, going beneath what's apparent, what's on the surface. To go beyond that is to see the mystery, which is what we were saying, where we all come from, right? Yeah, and also to say like desiring, what you think you're desiring is like kind of like addiction of things, right? Like, and also just like the cravings that we have, cravings of even cravings of thoughts, which we get addicted to this. I don't know, like online things that like the social media platforms and this sort of things. We always want to entertain our mind. It's always the kind of thoughts are always coming in and in and in, so that you can ruminate on things in your mind, which creates more cravings, right? Psychologically, that kind of track cravings, and yeah, that also leads to disrupting the pure nature, human nature. Yeah, that leads to also just seeing things the surface, at very surface level.
Yeah, because you're warping your nature. The thing is that what they're sort of saying in that chapter is like desiring itself is what do you say? It's not bad in the sense of if it's just something like morally neutral, or something like something that is needed for your own spiritual quest, a desire for your own spiritual quest. But desires become a problem with what you said. They become a problem because desires become addiction and craving. Like desires are a result of addiction and craving. So you desire something because you crave it or you're addicted to it. And so that's where we are then become possessed by whatever it is, whatever we crave or whatever we are addicted to, which depletes our energy and blocks us off from receiving the fundamental forces of the universe. That's what happens. And so your psychology, your whole psyche is its whole energy basis is just focused on, it's possessed by whatever it is addicted or it craves.
Constantly we are in a state of distraction. We're always distracted, right? So that kind of disrupts our vision to see things clearly. So that just desire is it's kind of ongoing, right? And I think sometimes that we don't even know that we have so much desires, so cravings. Like we sometimes forget how much cravings that we have, right? And we just constantly going after it. Right?
Yeah, well, that's what look at the whole world. Everyone's so busy desiring a life that they don't have, and they're torturing themselves to get that life. It's a form of self-torture. And people are all out trying to be entrepreneurs, and they're trying to be the richest and the most famous people in the world, and they're killing themselves doing it. And they're blocking themselves from the feeling of the way, the understanding of this way of life, which is, for whatever reason, is always there, but people can't recognize that way. They don't feel that in their life, and then because they're focused on, or they're possessed by their desires, and so then you have the world you have. You know what I mean? Like basically, it's a result of a lot of people who are desiring to have a certain way of life, or are opposed by certain people who are, conflicting with their own perspective of life, and they desire to disprove them, or so forth and so on. We can go down the line with this. It doesn't end with desires, see. But the Tao Te Ching's not saying... See, one of the problems, and this comes with the translations, the problem with translating ancient Eastern texts into English is when people started reading, especially Taoist, Buddhist, and Hindu texts, when desires were mentioned, it's right to use the word desire, but when you think that you can destroy all desires, that leads to a form of psychosis, because desire itself is helpful in the sense that, especially if you're on a spiritual quest and so forth and so on. You need to have a healthy desire to, like I said, desires can be morally neutral, or they can be addictive and they can lead to craving. And they're the ones that ought to be avoided, because that's the ones that spend most of our psychic energy.
Yeah, so that we could say like kind of pure desire, in a sense, in a spiritual path, where Muji says this a lot, like you desire to be not to desire.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So that kind of a pure desire is very necessary. And it's very human thing too. I think it's part of a human nature, which is actually essential to transform ourselves inwardly. And it will not happen without having a pure desire, right?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
It's, like even if we look at it in Buddhism, right, people misinterpret the text within Buddhism. And Buddha talks about desires and this and that. But what he's really talking about is craving. And that's kind of, in more recent translations, a lot of people, when they translate the Nikayas and so forth and so on, they do mention that when we're talking about desire here, we're talking about craving. You know what I mean? We're not talking necessarily about desire. Yeah. But desire is a byproduct of craving and addiction as well, and so forth and so on. So, like you mentioned, social media, all of these things. Like for example, like people's addiction to their phone, right, and social media, it keeps their mind in a certain place, and there's a tightness in the mind. There's not a freeness in their being. You're constricting yourself from becoming an aperture for the whole universe to express itself. And the point, and in some sense, the point of being a human being is to allow those fundamental forces of the Tao to be expressed through us. But it can't be expressed through us if you are constantly because when you are desiring and you're craving and you're addicted, so forth and so on, you are contracting your being, which blocks any sort of reception from the source entering your being. So you're blocking yourself from receiving those cosmic energies of the universe, because you're addicted to what's happening out here in the 10,000 things, and social media and phones and this and that is just a manifestation of the 10,000 things and a manifestation of the human mind. And so we become addicted to that, and then it's very nuanced then, because if you take in socialization and so forth and so on, culture, pop culture, then you have fame and wealth and fortune and this and that. And if you and I were to talk to a couple of human beings 50,000 years ago or something like this, they wouldn't understand what we would be talking about, like, because we would be talking about socialization, like, and so forth and so on, right? And they have never gone through any of that, because it's small scale societies, but we live in large scale societies with free and open information sourcing and everything, right? So we have what we have now, which means that we ought to revert to ancient texts like the Tao Te Ching urgently.
Yeah, we have created all these things through such advanced technology and science, right? And it definitely benefited the entire humanity, improving lifestyle and lifespan and whatnot. But also it had become such a big distraction, right? And that distraction kind of blocking everyone to open up to connect to that source, right? It became such a kind of very thick distraction to break through, because nowadays the younger generations coming through, they are like kind of born into this information technology age that they may never have been exposed to this real natural environment and lifestyle in that sort of natural environment, right? And those people will just completely disconnected to being true human being, as in a complete natural sense, right?
It's like a thick covering, right? Like you put a thick covering over your mind. You've got this thick covering over your mind of like information and socialization, cultural conditioning and everything, right? It's sitting over your mind, and that's where you behave and you act from. You act from this thickness,
Yeah.
and then the mind's but there sitting there going, man, but the mind's pure nature is empty, spontaneous, and free. It's stillness itself. And it's only when you can come back into harmony. See, the irony is, and as Lao Tzu points out in the Tao Te Ching, that in a chapter later in the text, that when you come back into stillness, that's when you actually feel that way. You feel that through your being. You feel that through existence, where there's this, this sense of you are, in some sense, perfectly calibrated to the universe, and you're moving as one with the universe and perfectly adapted to it. In Shaivism, like they would say, you become sort of like a limb of Shiva, where the the sort of the will of the Tao or Shiva is moving through you, but your will is completely subsided, your personal will. And so the problem is that, let's say most people in the world have not come in touch with that stillness at the core of their being. And in every meditation practice that you practice, doesn't matter whether it's Zazen or Tai Chi Chuan or Hatha Yoga or any of these, the point of the practice is to come back to that pure, unstained awareness. That's the nature of our being. That stillness within stillness, like Lao Tzu would say. That's the point of all of those, is to come back, because from that, the pure source, from the Tao, that's all that there is. There's no this or that. There's no, there's no good or evil or right or wrong. There's just what is, and there's not a over-identification with the 10,000 things, with who you are as a person, with your body, with the world around you. This is all just a manifestation of that one source of the Tao. And so the problem is with modern society and with the evolution of our world is this constant identification with the material world, which is continually turning our attention away from the source. And this is, in some sense, why a lot of religions are dying. And, there's a lot of people probably are happy about that, because, some religions may be violent and so forth and so on. But the problem with it is that we're turning away from the fundamental reality at the base of our being. And you only have really like sciences like quantum physics and so forth and so on, who are trying to understand the essence of the universe, pure consciousness and so forth and so on. But in general, most people are turning away from that. And I think that one thing that I've noticed from doing this for a long time is people, for whatever reason, are attracted to Taoism, because Taoism itself doesn't have a lot of religious or cultural trappings. It's just kind of like an understanding of the way things are. And similar to Vedanta, right? Vedanta, you could say, is not a religion. It doesn't have a lot of the Hindu cultural aspects superimposed onto it. It doesn't matter if you're a Shaiva or a Vaishnava or whatever. The point of Vedanta or Taoism is to understand that way in your life that can be understood, which is always there, but it's just about letting go of this control in your life to let life sort of do its thing,
Although a lot of people understand that just let the things to just be the way it should be is the path of non-existence, so that'll eventually benefit you. But that path is somewhat so foreign and unknown, like a stillness within the stillness. And like in the first chapter says, darkness within the darkness. And that is such, somewhat too metaphysical concept for a lot of people, especially in modern days, people who are living in such materialistic lifestyle. And that darkness within the darkness, that may appear to them maybe too like abstract or unknown, so that somewhat, do you think they're like a bit afraid or being fearful of knowing it or stepping into that direction, so that it's that taking first step to that darkness is somewhat maybe too difficult for a lot of people? Like, do you
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because first of all, it's a completely different way of living, right? Like, as we know, and is that when you choose this path and you choose to understand the way of nature, it's completely, I would say, opposite to conventional thinking, opposite to conventional thinking and conventional way of life, because it's not that you don't live in society and this and that, but your orientation of thinking is completely different, and your way of behaving becomes different. Your perception is different. And so the problem, I think, for a lot of people from that perspective is it's easier to follow the social trends. It's easier to behave the way other people are behaving. It's easier to fall for the dualistic hypnosis of society. It's just easier, right? And we've all been there.
comfortable?
It's comfortable, right? Because everyone else is thinking the same. Where everyone who is listening and watching us right now, and you and I, we see the world differently. We don't see this or that. We don't see the right or wrong. It's just what is. And like your whole existence is to come back into alignment with that reality, with the way things are, as opposed to the way society is. Because society, again, is a construct. It's in and of itself is a superimposition on the reality. It's a superimposition from minds that wanted the world a certain way. And that's not the way things actually are. And this began all the way back, ironically, with Confucius in opposition to Lao Tzu, because, you know, pre-Confucian times were Taoist societies, not everywhere, but in China, but there were Taoist societies which weren't primitive. They were just small-scale societies where everyone just lived in harmony with each other, and they didn't have moral rules and obligations and so forth and so on. There were no rituals and blah, blah, blah. And then Confucius came along and gave his own form of morality for people to try and, for them to self-cultivate and become, you know, a junzi, a gentleman, so to speak. And so that has inherent problems within it, as we know, because not everyone is the same, and you're not tending to the nature of people. You're thinking that each and every person is the same, and they're not. Psychologically, they're not. And Taoism addresses this through the concept of Li, which is the organic pattern in our mind, where each and every one of us have a different organic pattern, which is why we resonate with certain things differently, which is why, you know, we may be talented at one thing and some people aren't talented at the other. This kind of addresses that, where Confucius is saying, no, 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 we ought to all be the same, we ought to sleep a certain way, we ought to eat a certain way, we ought to address each other a certain way, even if it conflicts with your psychological structure and so forth and so on. So we essentially are warping our nature to be natural, which is stupid, right? Like, because Lao Tzu is saying there's no way to cultivate to be natural. There's only just being natural. Nature itself is nature. You are nature, and how you express yourself, and let's not say express yourself, because that can be influenced by cultural and social conditioning. But the way you are in general, like your psychology and what you're interested in and so forth and so on, is just your nature. It's just the way you are. So the scary thing is that for people, I think, is that Lao Tzu, he is, because he's saying stick to the unhewn wood, he's completely against self-cultivation. He's against all of these things that you think that you have to create something for yourself to be someone, when in the end, that's a form of hypnosis and actually a form of psychosis. It's a psychopathy, because you are not comfortable in your own skin. You're not comfortable in the way that you are. Doesn't mean you shouldn't dissect it, because the thing is, right, for example, you and I, you come from Korea, I come from Australia. There's going to be cultural and social conditioning that's been embedded in you, and what people have to get skilled at identifying is what is a cultural way of, am I acting culturally or nationalistically, or is this actually who I am? You have to get good at doing that, because if you start to say that, oh, this is just who I am, and it's like, yeah, but that's just what Koreans do, or that's just what Australians do. That's not really, that's a form of conditioning, right? So that there's a heightened level of trying to identify what is your nature and also what is a form of socialization.
But as you know very well about Far Eastern Asian culture, in speaking of Confucianism, it's so thick. It's very thick that you, like, by the age you become an adult, you have been indoctrinated to be in a certain way for so long. And when you become an adult, so that you can do whatever you want, because you're now no longer living with your parents, and you have your own place to live and whatnot. So you are kind of completely independent emotionally and physically. But by that time that you would still do things same as what you have been doing when you were a teenager, and you would still think the same, and you still go about the business the same way as you were told to, right? And you kind of completely lose your identity in a way, like who you really are, like what your real nature is, what your real character is like. And you yourself consciously have no idea who you really are, you know. And that brings a lot of psychological damage, I think. And you have this so ingrained anxiety that you don't even know you're anxious, but you constantly suffer from this ingrained anxiety for probably entire their life, right? But the problem is that you're not conscious of it, because that is so deep. Maybe change your DNA structure. Who knows?
Who knows?
It's that bad.
It's that bad. Yeah.
So it gets quite a big problem, I think, in individual, and that's how thick the Confucian cultural indoctrination is. Yes, really. And as we know, like a lot of people, close people around me, like friends or family members, they suffer from it. Like they want to live free life. They want to live free in a sense that not having to get told how to think and how to behave and how to live your life and whatnot. And they completely lose their ability to do that. Why? Because they never had an opportunity to. They never had chance to act the way you wanted to act. Ever. Because that's how it is really like to be, to come from the Far Eastern Asian countries. Yeah.
It's kind of like these days with all of the wokesters and all of the social justice warriors policing everyone's thoughts, right? So they're all policing ordinary people's thoughts and this and that, and then it's making people scared to speak their mind and speak freely and live freely. That's a new cultural adaptation, right? It's again, all of this woke ideology and all of this and that has come from social media. It's come from people who have attached to infectious ideas that some of these ideas in and of themselves are not true, and also have become an overgeneralization of certain things, and also have been a warping of moral principles that we ought to uphold, but at the same time, it's kind of they've warped this sense of morality, you know, and so then they, from an unintelligent perspective, they begin to police other people. So they're kind of like the modern Confucian, right? They're policing other people, and they're policing the way people think. And then once you get into a society where people are policing the way you think, then you are heading down the direction of what you said. You're heading in that direction of, like in Far Eastern Asia, where people lose connection with actually who they truly are, because they're always, they start to become mindful of, I can't say that because I will get attacked on Twitter, and I can't speak my mind. And so then you start policing yourself unconsciously. It's a whole game of it's psychotic in a sense. It's psychotic. And so you're creating this psychotic society. And then you have, like you said, that subtle anxiety at the base of your being that you're not even conscious of. I liken that anxiety to the sense of, for example, and a lot of people probably don't know this because they're always connected to their phone and social media, but you and I, we often take long extended breaks from social media. We don't have a phone, but we don't have a phone capable of that stuff. We take long breaks from social media, and what you realize is that that anxiety at the core of your being, once you're away from social media, like I'm away from YouTube or Facebook and that, it's like, wow, like then you begin to open up more, and the clouds begin to evaporate, and
it feels like normal.
You feel normal.
Like, damn, this is how it feels like to be normal.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Just normal, like, yeah.
Well, because we've taken people on retreat and that and this and that in India and stuff like that, and they instantly, when they're away from their phone and social media for, say, 10 days, their eyes change, their facial features change. I mean, they look brighter, and that, for example, to begin with, there's a little bit of that, there's that tension in your psychosomatic organism of, but I'm used to like checking Facebook every day, or some people every hour or every minute, and then that's all taken away, and then you see that anxiety begin to burp out of your being, and then you begin, as you said, you begin to feel normal again.
And that you feel normal, that means to also say that you finally feel the present moment.
Yeah.
Like, meaning that we are always like agitated by many things, like thinking of that you have to do something in an hour or two, or like you're always in the future.
Yeah.
You're always thinking ahead or thinking of the past. You're never kind of present.
Yeah.
So when you're on the phone, when you're on computer or social media all the time, you can never be at present moment.
Yeah.
Like you get engaged to this like a picture or a post that you're looking in the social media, that you already instantly, your mind is at that whatever that you're looking at, and the mind is such an intelligent thing that it goes on and on, thought after thought, and you're kind of completely off the cosmos.
Yeah.
Then you're never at the present moment. Yeah. But without any of these those distractions, we can finally feel normal. That meaning that we can finally be at present moment. Mm-hmm. You can see things more clearly. You can kind of finally just breathe. You can recognize that you're breathing in the present moment. Mm-hmm. That's what I think is missing to a lot of people's life. Yeah. Because we're always connected to online world. That you completely lose track of your own self, so that you're never in the present moment.
That's right. And even if we take that even further, socialization is a distraction.
Oh, big time. Cultural
conditioning is a distraction. It's all a distraction away from what we've been talking about. It's a distraction from the eternal Tao, from the Nameless. And so that builds, as you said, in mentioning Korean society and Far East Asian society, it creates a certain sense of anxiety and suffering and stress on a subtle level. It does for everyone, right? It doesn't matter actually what cultural conditioning. There are expectations on you that in some sense aren't natural. That's the problem, right? So someone's putting an expectation on you that doesn't feel right, or it was from thousands of years ago, which doesn't adapt to modern society, and so forth and so on, right? Like in Far East Asian countries, for example, not everyone follows Confucianism to its nth degree, right? Like not everyone's sleeping in a certain posture and this and that. There might be a few nuts still doing that, but in general, like your family don't do that, and so on and so on. But there are cultural things that your family would follow from Confucianism. But those conditionings from Confucius's time, we're talking about, 400 to 500 BCE here. So you're talking a long time ago. And for that to have meaning now is kind of ridiculous, considering the evolution of the world. And what the Tao Te Ching represents is the Tao Te Ching represents, as other sacred texts represent, is they are speaking about, like what Jacob Needleman said, something beyond the social and biological factors of life. So it's going beyond the form of socialization and this and that. And that's why the Tao Te Ching still holds weight today, because it's not something that's bound to a particular point in time. For example, if you read the Analects from Confucius, right? You read the Analects from Confucius, I would say that there's some good stuff in the Analects, but like the general premise of the book, of Confucius's teaching, this and that, holds weight only if we're talking 400 to 500 BCE,
Yeah.
It doesn't hold weight now. So the Tao Te Ching itself is that text to unravel all of this conditioning and socialization that you've gone through. And that's why when people start to read the Tao Te Ching, they're like, it's like a great relief for a lot of people.
Oh yeah, big time.
They read it and they're like, that is the way things actually are. But it's one of those things. It's like the elephant in the room, right? Like it's there. You're not noticing it's there. It's always been there. That natural way is always there. But for whatever reason, because of socialization and because of the way you've been brought up, you don't notice it. And so, but then once people come across the text, it's such a great boon, because then you realize that, wow, like I've been suffering all of these years because of this certain hypnosis that has been inculcated inside of me, and I'm behaving from that form of hypnosis, which is only causing other people harm and incurring harm on myself.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of Confucianism, not directly that these Asian countries are to follow the certain way to behave, certain way to even sleep, and wrap your girls' feet around the
bind the feet.
Yeah, bind the feet, and then not to grow, and because having females having a big feet is not considered as a beauty and things like that. That's been not followed for quite some time. I think the kind of literal tradition of the Confucianism. But I think what still lives on is like what you mentioned with the social justice warriors, how they want to police the way people want to say about things and way even people think and this and that. There's a form of, I think, Confucian dynamics, Confucianism's trace, I think. That's what's, I think, causing more troubles around the world, not only in Far Eastern Asian countries. Far Eastern Asian countries don't necessarily practice that literal sense of this the practicing Confucianism, but more so to follow, kind of dynamic of the Confucianism, to say that, like, mold people in a certain way, that kind of thing. Yeah. Like, because there is clear distinction between what's good and bad, you ought to follow the good path, right? And the good path is to, respect your parents and elders and always look after your family members. That's the first and foremost. Your individual desires is the second, and this kind of thing. The social status is so important, so that you ought to dress in a certain way, to perceive in a certain way by other people, and go to university and get a good education and follow all these social path to be in the top of the social status. And that is to still uphold by, as you know, most Asian people, even Asian people in Australia is the same.
Yeah, for sure.
The kind of trace of Confucianism is very strong and still there to practiced by most people. And if you are not in line by that chain of thought, then you are kind of outsider. You are outcasted.
Like you.
Yeah, like myself. But again, like I said, it's not necessarily that's to happen in only Asian people. No. That's happening in the West. It's a different look, different landscape.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But same trace is appearing within politically corrected minded culture that's very growing very rapidly nowadays, and that's kind of form of a Confucian trace, I believe.
Yeah. Well, the way political correctness is at the moment, it's a complete nightmare. I think. See, again, political correctness was one of those things that began in like the '60s and this and that, and it was well intentioned. But then, as you move forward, unintelligent people get hold of it, and then they apply it to things that are completely out of sync with the way it actually is. You know, political correctness came about because the way people spoke in that back in the 50s and 60s was a little bit, you know, let's just say outdated, and the way people spoke about other races and stuff like that was ridiculous. And so, and we don't speak like that these days because of that political correctness movement. But then that turned into policing what everyone says, and then policing what everyone says is based on your own view, your own ideology. And then, so then you have this whole subtle game, which is ridiculous. And so, in speaking what, you know, we could talk about that forever because, you know, it's a current problem, a current sickness in the world. But that's related to like what you were saying about like that subtle, you know, conditioning to be Confucian and you ought to be like this from birth, right? And so Lao Tzu's point is that the starting point is already wrong. So you're looking at your children, right? You're looking at your children and your perspective is that they're uncultured beasts. Now that is a Confucian and a Christian mentality because you're a sinner. You ought to be cultivated and you ought to be moral according to whatever system it is. Here I'm speaking primarily about Confucianism and Christianity. And so you are looking at a pure being, which is a child, as an uncultured beast. They need to be cultivated. And we base our perception of that, if, you know, say if we have a child and the child's running around crazy, this and that, it's a kid. That's what kids do.
Yeah.
They don't need a form of cultivation. Like, they're going to get older and they're going to grow out of that. Rarely do you see an adult running around the streets like
what a crazy person.
You don't see that because the way people grow and evolve, they grow out of that. It's just that's the beauty of a human being growing. And so Lao Tzu's perspective of the unhewn wood, of sticking to the natural, is that you don't need to cultivate anyone. That we are not uncultured beasts from birth. We are nature and we are fundamentally good. And ironically, that's what Mencius used to taught and Mencius used to teach. And Mencius is considered a Confucian, but it's a departure from Confucius' mentality, where Confucius believes we are beasts from birth. And this is what a lot of people don't. A lot of people, you know, wax lyrical about Confucius being this wise guy and this and that, and they don't even understand Confucianism. Confucius believes that we are beasts from birth. He doesn't have a high opinion of women, so forth and so on. He would not have a place in society in this day and age because his perspective of life was essentially crazy. And Lao Tzu knew this, Zhuangzi knew this, and then they offered advice on how to detach and dissociate from that form of self-cultivation and socialization. And so your starting place is wrong, you see. And so that's what's happened in Far East Asia. That's what's happening everywhere in the world. The starting place is wrong. This kid needs to learn this and this and that. And it's not that the cultural information is wrong. The cultural knowledge that's passed down from generation to generation can help. The problem is, again, with the over-identification with it and the suffering that comes from that. You know, if it's leading to people suffering, then that becomes problematic, right? And that's what Lao Tzu's point is if it's all well and good, you can have, you know, your rites and your rituals and this and that, but if it becomes a impediment on the path of realization, then that needs to be pushed aside and it needs to be discarded of. Unless you can be a genuine pretender like Zhuangzi and you can just play your role efficiently and be in society.
But that itself it requires a lot of self-study.
That requires a lot of self-study, yeah.
You need to know what that is and what that means to be a genuine pretender, what that really is, right?
Well, that's why Lao Tzu is kind of just like, just get out of there.
Yeah.
You know, just get out of there and
finish it all together.
Finish it all together. Like his yeah, it's probably a more practical approach in some sense than Zhuangzi's. From a sense that if you are really suffering from socialization and from your culture and whatever.
And for those individuals, that way would be much easier, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that what people need to understand is if you understand the Tao Te Ching and you understand really what it's saying, then you begin to act and behave from that place anyway, because that's the way of nature. You have two choices. You can align with socialization and whatever society is telling you that you should do and so forth and so on, or you can align with the way things actually are. And the way things actually are never change. It's just the way things are. It's that innate inner structure of the universe that we experience consciously.
Right.
We experience it consciously because, like I mentioned before, we are a representation of the whole. A human being is a representation of the whole. All of the energy of the universe from the Big Bang till now is moving through all of us and it's manifesting itself as us. And so that's the point, is to come back to that place. And so the way things are is always going to be the way things are. The way society is and culture and that is, they're always going to change. Always going to change because things change in the world. We see that now, right? Things are changing. And so people and society is changing, especially due to the pandemic and so forth and so on. Will it go back to being the same? Probably, but not, who knows when. You know, we'd all like it to go back tomorrow. But that's the choice we all have. And so the Tao Te Ching is an opportunity to move back into that direction, you know, and to come back into alignment with the way things are.
And Tao Te Ching itself is so practical at any time, any way, really. Because, again, like you said, when you read those texts, it's such a relief that it's okay to be who you truly are. And there's the starting point is trust, right? You are nature, so that whatever you think and you have become is also nature, and there is nothing wrong with it. And so that it gives you the tremendous the trust within yourself and nature, and you follow that law of nature, which is just how things are, really. So that gives you just to be who you really are and who you really want to be, really.
Yes.
And that's such freedom. That's why you feel so relieved, like you said, when we read these texts.
Well, that starting place of trust is essential, right? That's essential in letting go and everything like that. That's the essence of De in Tao Te Ching. That's that power, that virtue that comes through your life when you trust. When you let go of the banks of the river and you allow the river, instead of fighting the current, you just move with the current, and then the river's power becomes your power. See, that's what the Tao is. It's ironic that if you're trying to hold on and you're trying to hold on to all of these things and you're trying to be a certain way, then that, to use that river analogy, that the power of the river can't use you because you're holding on to these things. It can't use you. But once you let go, then it can use you. And then you start to see that individual do things in their life and inspire others and so forth and so on, or live just a contented life. And you go, you know, that guy or gal, they're onto it, you know what I mean? They're really onto it. And in talking about that trust, it's ironic because Lao Tzu, he mentions in the text, renounce wisdom, renounce morality, and filial piety just is natural. You see? So in trusting life, things that are innately there are just there. You don't have to create rules and regulations like Lao Tzu has about, you know, filial piety and all of these things about respecting your mum and dad. We naturally do. When have you seen a kid like, I don't want anything to do with them at 5 or 6 years old, like, nah, I want nothing to do with my parents. Never happened, ever. It's never, ever happened. It's there, right? You naturally respect your parents. You don't have to be told to respect your parents. You naturally love your mother and father.
You know, like when you get told something to do, to not to do, or to do, that you always want to do opposite.
Yeah.
So I think it applies the same way in that thing as well, in filial piety, that you ought to respect your parents no matter what, all the time. But if you get told that from a young age all the time, like you want to think otherwise because it's so induced. It's not natural.
Not natural, yeah. That's where resentment to parents happens when people become teenagers. They begin to resent their parents and so forth and so on. This is part of the result of, you know, the constant indoctrination that you ought to, you know, behave like this with your mum and your dad and this and that. And it's like, no. It's naturally there anyway. You don't have to, you know, filial piety exists naturally without being told that it has to exist because, you know, like what Lao Tzu says, renounce wisdom, renounce morality, and filial piety are already there. You don't need to have all of this knowledge and be clever with words, and you don't have to have this clever rules and regulations to follow to actually be filial. They're already there. You don't have to do it. And that's part of trust. That's about trusting the way life is, trusting nature. And the way nature is that we naturally love our mother and father or our brothers and sisters and so forth and so on. We don't need to be told that. You don't need to be told that you love your brother. You already love your brother. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be forced to think that way. And that's the problem, see? That's the problem with this idea of that we're beast-like from birth when we're not. We have this innate goodness, as Mencius and Lao Tzu would talk about, this innate goodness, which is at the heart of Taoism, and it only becomes warped when we create division, when we create this and that. That's when it becomes warped. That's when, if you create good, bad exists. If you create, this, that exists. You go on down the line, so...
Yeah, I mean, as you know firsthand, directly, me and my family relationship is that I feel that a lot, like you said, you naturally love them regardless way I think or way they think. I don't really care about it because we have that like relationship from birth and have a strong bond between family members no matter what. But almost like these cultural conditioning is becoming the obstacle for them to think the same. It's a big obstacle to overcome the strong and thick cultural indoctrination that you need to be a certain way within the family. Blocks the vision of really truly loving each other. Isn't it ironic?
It's ironic, yeah.
That's what I feel. Sometimes I feel very frustrated.
Well, it's like what one yogi said. He said it's very rare to be born with two wise parents.
Oh.
Because he was saying that because those parents themselves are so indoctrinated with the culture and the rules and the regulations of that culture, or the society and how you should behave, that real love is kind of in some sense, it's eclipsed a little bit. They love you for sure, but the love is filtered through certain understanding of.
The love is not conditional.
It's not.
It's conditioned.
Yeah, it's conditioned. It's not unconditional.
Unconditional. Yeah, it's not unconditional.
Yeah.
It's conditioned love.
Yeah, it's conditional love.
So I don't get it.
Yeah, it's a love sieved through filters. It's like cultural and social filters of how a child should behave, you know, and we've seen this, you know, many times, especially in the modern world, right, where we see, well, it's been like, there was, how many stories have we heard, for example, with, there was that story where the Christian pastor, his son was homosexual and he couldn't bear it. And then, you know, he was discarded from the family, and you know, there's a tragic ending to that story. And that again is you're not allowing nature to run its course, you know what I mean? You know, like a lot of people are pretty deluded thinking that homosexual people is a new phenomenon. It's not. There's always been homosexual people. That's just the way nature is. There are those people. There are people like that, and we should, you know, treat them with dignity and love and appreciate everyone. You know what I mean? Because that's just the lead. That's the organic pattern that flows through them. That's nature. That's what nature does. There's diversity in nature as well, you know. But the cultural conditioning, the pastor couldn't get out of, you know what I mean? Like his conditioning is that anyone who is homosexual is, you know, is a sinner and all this sort of nonsense. And so that's an extreme example of what can happen. And that again is getting away from the way things are. It's a superimposition on life. That's the snake and the rope. The pastor has a reality of a snake. That's all reality is. It's the snake, but it's just the rope, man. It's just chill, It's all good. It's a misidentification with reality. It's a misperception of reality, and that's constantly the existence that we're living in. Is this misperception of reality, and that's what the first chapter actually addresses. Mainly is that we are constantly living in this misperception of reality. We think reality is a certain way, and it's not a certain way.
This first chapter is there is a reason, I think, why this is a first chapter, because it addresses such fundamental and maybe kind of the most important idea in this spiritual realm. Which is truth.
Yes.
That is to follow the law of nature. And that is to call it Tao.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you remember Jiddu Krishnamurti said, truth is a pathless land, famous for saying that. Meaning, truth cannot be given a way of understanding, a doctrine of this is how it is, a path to follow to get there. It's not...
There's no framework.
There's no framework, yeah, exactly. And that's what Jiddu understood, you know what I mean? He's very obviously familiar with this text and many other spiritual texts. And that's, like you said, that's what Lao Tzu's illustrating in this first chapter. This is how it is. He's giving you that first. This is how it is. This is what really is. And then in that second, third, we'll go from there. First, you know what it is. I'm not going to, it's like a movie in reverse. We're going to get to the punchline straight away. This is how it is. I'm not going to lead you on.
Right.
This is how it is. Now I'm going to give you, after that, I'm going to give you a way of calibrating to that, of aligning with that, and a way of understanding that deeper. So then he gets into, you know, morality is a problem and all of these things, right? So many things.
Yeah.
And so first, let's address that you are experiencing life not the way it is. This is how life is. Your version of life is actually a misperception. And you're not seeing reality as it truly is. And there is a a way that has always existed and always will exist that you can experience on the conscious level. You experience this Tao on the conscious level.
Yeah.
So when you come into alignment with it, and you have let go of control and your personality and this and that, then you experience it consciously. And that's how you know it. It can't be measured by scientific instruments. It can't be explained with intellectual rigor. It is just there.
You know it consciously and you live by it
Yes.
all the time.
All the time.
Then you really know it.
And then there's an ease in your life. Remember, Zhuangzi talks about free and easy wandering. Zhuangzi's perspective is that if you have none of these things that are blocking you, and you have this extreme ease in your life, then when you take all of these out, and then in trusting the way the universe is, in some sense you are extremely confident.
Yeah.
Because you're just moving with life without any thoughts of what will happen or what happened in the past. You are, like you said earlier, you are completely in the present moment. And you are there. You know what I mean? You are in the truth.
You are awake.
You are
in
awake
that moment.
completely. And that's really what it's all about. And that's why, you know, he mentions that in the first chapter, you know what I mean? And that's why he says at the end of it, right? The gateway to all mystery.
Yeah.
So the dark, you know, the darkness within the darkness, right? Like, what is that? That's in it, you know? And that's the gateway to all mystery.
Yeah. And again, darkness within the darkness, that's to constantly look within ourselves.
Yes.
You know, that may seem unknown and may seem lost, but that's the gate of all mystery, which is I believe you could also say that absolute consciousness, absolute truth, right? That's the mystery that the first chapter is talking about.
Well, the returning of Taoism, of any spiritual path, is what you're saying. Is the looking back within. And in Buddhism, they would say turning away from samsara. You're turning away from samsara. This is samsara. You turn away from it. Turn away means you turn within. You're just turning away. You're going here. And this is an act of return, you see. And so when you are returning to the source, then you are not controlled by the dynamicness of the 10,000 things. You have no fear. Because you're gone this way, other people are going this way, but you've gone this way.
I think that turning away from all these things from outside, it becomes now much more difficult. Why? Because there's too much information than what we can fathom nowadays, right? Like 50, 100 years ago was much but easier than now.
Easier than now, yeah.
But now we have too much information out there which influence us way to think and behave, so that it's much more difficult. But more it becomes like that, the more we need this, the more we need to kind of almost like cling to this thing, like to return all the time. Like it almost need to kind of strive to apply this effort to look within, right?
There's so much vying for your attention out here. It's just trying to distract you from the source. That's what it's doing. And that's the nature of the 10,000 things. That's what it does. You know, it's...
Yeah, in the introduction, Needleman says that you need to put rigorous effort to look within.
Yes.
Yeah. So that not to act from that ego.
Yeah. Well, one of the similarities with all three of the great traditions, even let's add in Jainism there, is that your awareness is constantly trying to be hijacked by the external world. All you are is pure awareness.
Yep.
Everything you've experienced in life is through pure awareness. It doesn't matter even what you do. You can do all sorts of spiritual practices and this and that, but all you've ever been is pure awareness. And that pure awareness is constantly trying to be hijacked by everything everything is trying to hijack that pure awareness. And the goal of all spiritual practices is to come back into an abidance with that, and to abide and just be there. And then the 10,000 things will come and go, but the Tao will never leave you, as Lao Tzu said. That's the way it is. This body will die, but the Tao will never leave you. Only if you're in that awareness. If you're riddled up here and, who knows what's going to happen to you, And so that's the game that's constantly happening, right? Your awareness is being hijacked. Everyone's playing that game. Everyone's vying for your attention. They're trying to distract you. They're trying to get you away from that. Because if they can engage you in something, they've got you, right? The advertising industry is a perfect example,
And from doing so unconsciously, we most do it unconsciously, right? You're giving your power away to that, right?
To that, yeah.
To the outside entity, whether that's like advertisement or some people or whatever that is, whatever that distraction is, that your energy, let's say social media platforms, you constantly giving your precious energy away to this social media platform, which to me don't have any meaning.
Don't have any meaning, yeah.
It has no direct meaning to you at all,
No.
in reality, right? And we just constantly giving energy away, and that's why people are always exhausted, right? Tired. Tired. all the time.
Flat out.
That's why people need to drink more coffees, right? To get themselves
and they're depleting
up.
themselves more.
Energy drinks, and because it's just never-ending cycle.
Well, that's interesting you mention that, because the energy is a good point, because when you're expelling energy out here, it's funny, because when you reorient your focus back to your awareness, and you are in the act of returning, then that's how the de happens. That's how the real energy comes through. And it's not an energy like the energy you're expelling out here. It's a force that comes through your life. And that's the reality that a lot of people don't know about. See, that's what they don't know about. They don't know about that reality. People who meditate and this and that know about that reality. Some more than others, right? There's differing degrees to how much people understand this and that. Obviously, if you understand the depth of certain texts like the Tao Te Ching, or if you understand, the Mandukya Upanishad, or texts such in this vein, and you are a meditator, then you have a broader perspective of this reality and understanding. But the point is that the returning unlocks the power that is actually there. We all have that power base within us, that energy of the Tao within us. But if you're expelling your energy out here,
you're constantly giving away.
You're giving away. And the irony is that when you return, then when the river of the Tao, when its energy becomes your energy, then you begin to manifest whatever the Tao needs to manifest through you. Then it doesn't feel like work out here, and you're doing things, and you won't be distracted also by other things out here, because your focus is on the returning, and then the Tao is just using you as it will. And so the irony is, and what most people don't understand, is those fundamental forces of the universe, the Tao dwelling within us, are just not known. It's just a reality that's not known. That's what Lao Tzu is talking about. It's just a reality that's not known. Because people are focused on socialization, they're focused on how they should be, and
10,000 things.
They focus on 10,000 things. So it's just a different. It's just your awareness is not being molested by the 10,000 things no more.
Right.
It's
gone
in, and it's gone. I want to know the core of this existence, because through the core of this existence, I can understand the core of the whole universe. And then next minute, we've all felt this. Well, for those of you who are watching or listening who are long-term meditators or people of contemplation, then you know that you know this reality. You know what I mean? It kind of, in some sense, takes over your life, and its power becomes your power. Ironically, you don't really, your sense of person has even decreased though. Yeah, in saying your power, I mean this localization of awareness. It becomes this localizations of awareness's power, which is a more accurate description. Because if you're too much of a person, that's going to be an impediment and a blockage. Like the ego is a blockage of that fundamental forces.
Yourself as a person is not really there anymore.
No, exactly. And that's what allows you then to manifest all of this beauty and grace.
And only that way that you can use that, harness the energy in a correct manner.
Exactly. That's right. Because if you're guiding if your energy is coming from the ego, it will be misguided. Because it will be riddled with this and that, what is good according to your subjective viewpoint. And so all of your energy then is guided in that way. And the energy is not like, it's like running diesel, but you're an unleaded car. The Tao is the unleaded.
Okay, that's going to be a very troublesome.
Yeah, exactly. The Tao is the unleaded, but you're like, no, but wait up, I want to try the diesel. And then your whole psychosomatic organism is just...
Yeah, it's not...
It's
not quite right.
It's producing a reality that conflicts with others and also destroys your own being. Yeah. And so the Tao Te Ching essentially is a text to get you back in touch with those fundamental forces at the core of our being. And in a sense, down-regulating the impediment and the blockage to that, which is the ego and the sense of persona. And so that's why we do anything, and that's why we do all of our spiritual practices, and we study philosophy and so forth and so on. And so I think we really dissect the first chapter. It was
really in depth. I think.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Very good.
We enjoy talking about this text. Well, we've
all the time.
been talking about it privately forever, and so that's about it. So I hope you guys all enjoyed. Remember, like I said, I highly recommend going out and getting Jia Fu Feng and Jane English's translation.
Alan Watts also really praised this.
He praised this one too.
He read this.
Yeah, he even says on the back here, no one has done better in conveying Lao Tzu's simple and laconic style of writing, so as to produce an English version almost as suggestive of the many meanings intended. So Watts again highly recommended this text. I don't know if he knew these two. They're from a similar time, but like I said, and as you know, Needleman's introduction in and of itself is like one of the greatest things I think I've ever read from a contemporary philosopher on Taoism, and it's only literally 15 pages or whatever, and so really great. And so anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed. And like I said earlier, this is going to make up 81 podcasts that we will do on the Tao Te Ching. Not sequentially, we will do them every now and again. Let's call the series the 81 Meditations on the Tao Te Ching. And so I hope you got a lot out of it. A lot of people asked about, can Guyang and yourself talk about the Tao Te Ching or any sort of particular verse, and we thought we will take it one step further and we will talk about every verse. Yeah,
one chapter by one chapter, which is really good actually, to have a thorough understanding on the Tao Te Ching.
Yes, yes. And so we hope you enjoyed and we hope it helped you out, and we'll see you guys next week.